Hey there, everybody. Sajah Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism and Natura Sophia Spagyrix, and welcome back to The Plant Path. And this is a special episode today because it's an interview, and I don't do tons of interviews, but when I do them, I am excited about it. And in today's interview, I talked to Anne Armbrecht, author of this lovely book here called Following the Herbal Harvest, a search for the healing promise of plant medicines. And this is a little bit of a different kind of interview, I think, that I typically do here. Oftentimes I'm chatting with folks about, everything from clinical herbalism and really working with and using the plants medicinally with people, or we're talking alchemy and medical astrology and things like that. This discussion with Anne delves really into this kind of whole other side of herbal medicine that a lot of people probably actually are completely unaware even exists, or they don't really think about, and that is the herbal products industry. I met Anne. Well, I think originally I met her a long time ago at the International Herb Symposium, and then met her again last year in Cincinnati, Ohio at the American Herbal Products Association event that happened after the International Herb Symposium. And she gave a presentation about sustainability of herbs in Appalachia, where a lot of the American ginseng harvesting happens. And I thought her talk was very interesting. She's got a really great project called the Sustainable Herb Initiative, or SHI. And she's just doing great work and has traveled all over the world, observed everything from farmers to manufacturers to facilities to the whole supply chain. And her big question is, what is the process of a medicinal plant from seed all the way to the bottle of tincture sitting on the shelf at Whole Foods, or the encapsulated herbal product sitting at your local co-op? What is that process? What is that? And how can that be done in the best way possible from an ecological perspective, from a fair trade and workers' perspective, to preserving high quality herbal medicine that will actually heal? And one of the things that I really loved about the conversation that I just had with Anne was that she really has a foot in two worlds here, right? Where she's done herbal training. She studied with Rosemary Gladstar. She's very aware of the world of herbalists and herbalism. And yet her other foot is in the world of the products industry, which, believe it or not, is not always really run by herbalists, right? Like, a lot of you might be surprising to know that a lot of herb companies out there aren't actually run by herbalists. They're not started by herbalists. They're not managed by herbalists. Like, herbalists aren't even really part of the equation. Not for all of them. Of course, there's lots of companies that are obviously started by herbalists and run by herbalists and maintained by herbalists, but there's also a lot that aren't. And her whole thing is really bringing those two worlds together and helping people in the industry be aware of the plants themselves, the intelligence of the plants, and clearly has a very deep, reverent connection to nature, to the herbs, to the spirit of the plants, to the people and the cultures that have arisen around the medicinal plants. And she really wants things to be good. She wants people to be growing and manufacturing good quality medicine. She wants relationships to be positive amongst people in the products industry. She really wants to lift everything up. And I think that is a really wonderful thing. She also, you might have seen her work. She directed or co-directed a film called Newman, which really explores the world of herbal medicine. As a really great documentary. I remember I first saw it. She actually gave me a copy of it at an international herb symposium. Boy, it was probably back in the early 2000 teens, maybe 2012, 2013, sometime back then. So check out Newman, Anne's documentary. Check out the Sustainable Herb Initiative. Pick up a copy of Following the Herbal Harvest. This is eye-opening stuff. Anne tells some pretty interesting stories that she has heard in her worldly travels. And there's just some really great insights and perspectives that I think will be pretty eye-opening for you. So stay tuned and enjoy this episode of The Plant Path as I engage in a conversation here with Anne Armbrecht. Well, hello there, Anne. Thank you so much for joining me on The Plant Path. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Well, I was really excited to have this conversation with you because I got to hear you speak and got to meet you at the American Herbal Products Association meeting over in Cincinnati last year, and I really loved some of the things that you were sharing. Well, I loved everything that you were sharing, and I thought it would be great to have you here on The Plant Path. And I think you have some really interesting perspectives on things and things to share perspectives and insights into the world of herbal medicine that don't really talk about too much here on The Plant Path. So I'm really excited to have you here. I was curious if we could start out just kind of introducing yourself and talking a little bit about your work, especially in regards to the Sustainable Herbs Initiative.
Sure. So I'm an anthropologist by training, and I'm going to back up from Sustainable Herbs Initiative a bit to talk about how I got into this work, if that's okay.
It's great.
Anthropologist, and I did my research for my doctorate in northeastern Nepal, and I was looking at the relationship between villagers and the land. So that included actually a lot that was on land tenure and political disputes over. It was a common property system of land tenure, but also the shamanic journeys across the landscape. And you know, I when I went to Nepal, I had a lot of naive ideas about indigenous people having a stronger relationship with the land than we did. And I found it's like anything, it's more complex. There, yes and no. But when I came back, so I was there in the early 1990s. When I came back, I went to the Women's Herb Conference and met Rosemary Gladstar and other herbalists and decided to take Rosemary's apprentice program. And as I was in that program, I was struck by the similarities in how she spoke about the relationship with the plants and how it echoed what I had encountered in Eastern Nepal around a sense of restraint and respect, a sense of being in relationship with a more than living world and things like that. And so I was really drawn by herbal medicine because here were herbalists in the modern world. It wasn't, at the far end of a river valley at the end, like a week's walk from a road where I was in Nepal. And so I jumped into herbal medicine thinking this is the answer to everything. And as I studied, I realized, of course, with anything, it's black and white and there's more complications and contradictions. And my husband and I made a film kind of celebrating those values of herbal medicine in a way to bring them more to the forefront. And as we were interviewing people for that film, we interviewed people at Traditional Medicinals and Herb Farm and New Chapter. And I became interested in where herbs are from and the stories of the people and places behind finished herbal products. So is it okay if I keep telling the story?
Yeah. Keep going. You got me sucked right on in here, so it's great.
It shapes why I do the work, how we do the work at SHI. And so I had this question: what happens if we know the stories of the people and plants and places behind finished herbal products? I did a Kickstarter to raise funds to go tell those stories and to document them in video, and raised $60,000 for that, in large part because learning herbs And John Gallagher really put his energy behind it. And there was a lot of like $35 donations from herbalists who really helped me get to that higher level that allowed us to travel to Eastern Europe and India and Western US and to Europe, it's Germany and the UK, to create what was then the Sustainable Herbs Project. And that was a multimedia website with videos and telling the story of the steps it takes from herbs to go from source to finished product. And I thought my audience was the herb community, but then I really realized that I needed to understand companies and industry and the challenges that they were facing, because the herb classes I took at the time, it could be very black and white, like companies were good or bad, sourced locally but not globally, whereas so many herbs are sourced globally. And so I wanted to understand the complexity of the issues. And so took the program to the American Botanical Council, where it was for 5 years. And when I was there, I really took that time to really understand much more about the industry, the challenges that companies face. And that's what I write about in my book. And as I was doing that work, I would organize panels at trade shows to bring in different speakers with, a lot of experience in this to talk about what needed to happen around transparency and traceability and fair trade practices. And I realized everybody knows what needs to happen. The challenge more was what is keeping those individuals and companies from actually being able to make those changes. And so the work of Sustainable Herbs Initiative now, so last year I took it to the Sustainable Food Lab, because this is away from American Botanical Council, because Sustainable Food Lab is also really working to bring companies together to collaborate to address these challenges. And there's an approach that we do, but I'll stop for now because that was a long kind of answer.
No, it's great. Thank you for explaining all of that. I mean, it brings up, I've got all kinds of different directions I could take with this, but I think it's a really interesting point to think that I think a lot of people probably don't think of. You go out, you go to Whole Foods, you go to your local co-op, you go to your local herb shop, you look on Amazon, and it's just, there are so many herbal products out there these days. It just feels, it's crazy. It's overwhelming. And you look at the amount of stuff on the shelf, I guess the physical shelf, but also the digital shelf, so to speak. And you gotta wonder, like, where are all these plants coming from, and who's growing them, and who's harvesting them, and how is this all? Is this sustainable? Like, are these plants of decent quality? Is there issues with adulteration? I mean, it just seems like there's a huge kind of smorgasbord, I feel like, of issues that could arise there. So I guess I'm just curious. Like, what were some of the most surprising things that you've seen? And as someone that's involved in the herbal product industry, like, what do you see as, I don't know, I guess just like what some of those edges are in terms of sustainability and quality and accessibility and all of those things? I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but maybe you can wrap off of what I was just saying there for a minute.
Yeah, I'll try. Well, actually, so just before this interview, I was looking back through my book to get ideas. And there was this moment when I talked about in South India, I was visiting with an Indian botany professor. We were visiting some farms. I had heard this speaker at a conference talking about the really good work he was doing with the farmers. And so we traveled to visit. And he took us to the farm and the fields, and that was all lovely. And then after that, we went to a sparkler factory, which he also was investing in. And this sparkler factory was just off this dirt road in South India. I don't know if you've been there to South India, but it's like anywhere. There were these little sort of cement shacks where the sparklers were made, spread out because the risk of explosion. And the workers had their arms deep in whatever was covering the sparkler, right? Whatever that aluminum kind of thing is. And so it was just covered with that. And at the time, I thought I was working to tell the whole story of the industry. And I thought, I have no interest in telling the story of an industry where a company is both supposedly doing really good practices with farmers and also having these workers with their arms up their shoulders, that aluminum. And that's an extreme example of, capitalism, right? The point was to make money. But it was also, then I was visiting an herbalist after my first trip in the UK, and I had just a little footage on my phone of it was a small machine. There's huge machines out there. This was not even a big machine. And she was so surprised that it was being processed at the mechanization. And so I think, and that was also a wake up for me because I was so surprised by the mechanization. And that's just an example of my naivete, right? Because if you're importing container loads of herbs, you have to be mechanized. And
oh, absolutely.
And so I think that was like the degree of mechanization and the gap of our understanding, like the naivete in the way herbalism was being taught, that there wasn't. And that it's like, that's the world. And so how do we engage with it and the companies that are doing that work and trying to do it right? Because there are ones that are doing it right, and address, things like, so horrible quality things, like another place in South India where wild harvesters would bring in sacks of herbs the sacks had been used for cement. And so they were just reusing the sacks. And so, say a company that's using Fair Wild certification or organic certification, they get new sacks and they'll provide those collectors with those sacks. And so there are steps to pay attention on their way to engage. And so I guess the gap of education was another surprise.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of people, like you're talking about kind of the naivete of it all, and it almost feels like there's this little bit of a gap or a split where, over here you have the herbalists and the people that are learning about the plants and botanizing and learning therapeutic properties and want to be clinical practitioners, and they're learning all the medicinal properties and they're really on the herbal path. I'm sure like a lot of the folks that go through Rosemary's programs and other herbal programs. And then there's this whole other world of the product industry. And it seems like a lot of the times the herbalists maybe come into it thinking like, oh, these herbal products, this is like someone going out and picking these leaves and grinding it with the mortar and pestle and extracting it. And it's like, man, you look at the level of mechanization and it is an industry, right? And an industrialization of it. In order to do it on massive scale, it is definitely a very eye-opening experience. I remember I was there's a company I believe I think it's Italy, that makes a lot of manufacturing equipment for large scale herbal processing, and they had this whole thing of it was really interesting to watch the way they were doing the rose hips. And they had this it really involved, giant pieces of equipment that would, crush the rose hips a certain way and then sift through to get all the little hairs out and then to separate the seeds and then to move them on these huge conveyor belts. And, and then you got tens of thousands of pounds of final grade, cut, graded rose hips. And then, you buy the rose hips and you don't really think of like the level of what goes in to get that to you. It's pretty eye-opening to me. And so I guess what that brings up to me is like, what do you think, like, why do you think someone in the world of herbalism should be educated on the herbal products industry and think about and consider and really care about where their herbs come from and how those herbs are processed and handled and taken care of?
Before I answer that, I wanted to just respond to when you were talking about the rose hips. And one of the things when I was first traveling around Eastern Europe, and I was able to visit some Fair Wild certified processing centers because they wanted to have their story told. And Joseph Brinkman, who was at Traditional Medicinals for years, he was head of sustainability. He's done more to bring awareness to these issues than probably anyone else. And so I would be texting him like, what do I look for? Are spider webs bad? Because we were in this drying facility with all these spider webs. And he said, spider webs aren't great, but there are other things that are worse. And so, and then at that same factory, there were all these, I think it was dried goldenrod, and it's supposed to be in sacks. It wasn't in sacks, and it looked like it had gone to seed. And I'm not an expert, but I thought that's probably past when you should harvest it. And so I asked the owner of the facility about the quality, and he said yes, the harvesters brought it in when it was past prime, but he said the relationship for him with the harvesters mattered more. And maintaining that relationship depended on his buying what they're harvesting. If he rejected it, that would create trouble with the relationship. And he would find another buyer. He knew that it wasn't the top quality goldenrod, but he would find another buyer for that goldenrod. And so why I'm sharing those two examples is a lot of this journey for me has been learning to see what matters and why, and what are the things that make a difference. And then the other part, like just that example of him finding another market for that goldenrod that was past prime, past when a company like Traditional Medicinals would ever buy it, that's why people should care where herbs are from, because there are should care if you're buying anything that you're not growing and harvesting yourself. You should care if you're encouraging anyone else to use herbal products, because the quality of that end product is directly related to the attention that's given each step of the way. Herbalists talk a lot about the importance of intention, right, in the relationship with the plants. And this is like the social economic version of intention, right? If you're paying attention, you'll notice if peppermint's mixed in with the nettles that you're harvesting. And if you're not paid very well, then you're probably not going to really care. But if you feel better about your job, you're more likely to bring more care to how you handle the herbs. And anyone who works with plants knows that you grow them and that's one part, but then how you handle them afterwards is going to determine the quality of that plant. And so if you care about having that end product do what you hope it's going to do, you want to make sure that people are paying attention all the way. People tend to pay attention more, as I said, when they're better cared for, get better pay, have living conditions, aren't worried, all the things that make us all do better work. Mm-hmm. And then there's another part, I think, that, so that's the selfish, is this product going to work for me side. But there's also at Sustainable Herbs Initiative, we do these in-person gatherings. And a couple years ago, about 30 of us were in Appalachia. And we had this roundtable conversation with wild harvesters and this is Southwest Virginia, which is, really poor, impoverished, challenging, old coal mining areas. And there was an herbalist Lori Briscoe, who spoke. This was a roundtable of stakeholders in the industry. So brands, ingredient suppliers, traders. And she's an herbalist who worked in the area. And she said, the people in this region, they've been exploited by the logging industry. They've been exploited by the coal mining industry. They've been exploited by the pharmaceutical industry that's dumped opiates in the area. She said they want to believe in the herbal products industry, but it would be sick and twisted if in producing herbs to heal people in other places, they're not also helped in some way.
Yeah.
And so just that the end is only... these products are about wellness. And to me, that wellness is only as good as the wellness each step of the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And that, to me, speaks to the integrity of really our healing art. Like, it would be very, as you said, very contradictory to be, creating these healing herbal products, but in the process of getting that product to market, it's exploiting people or, causing problems in the local area where they're being produced, or if people are just getting totally ripped off or things like that. So, I mean, I love that you are involved in this. And like you said, from seed to getting on the shelf, what does that process look like? So, I mean, can you walk through that a little bit? Like, it sounds like you've traveled all over the world. You've observed a lot of different companies. Sounds like farmers, manufacturers, bulk herb providers. Like, I'm just curious, from someone that doesn't know anything about the industry that might be listening, like, what does the process usually look like, say, of an herb being grown on a farm overseas to actually getting into a supplement bottle that what someone sees on the shelf at Whole Foods? Like, what does that process look like?
So there can be two different, there's a lot of different ways, but do you want the better route or the worse route?
Let's hear both. I mean, I'm curious, right? I mean, I'm curious to hear both sides of this topic, right? Because I know there's probably some like not so savory aspects of all of this, and I'm sure there's also some really great stuff. I'm curious to hear the spectrum.
So, I think of a company. So this is a what's called a processing facility company in, say, South India, and they are certified fair for life. Certifications aren't perfect, but certifications help provide the difference between this first example and the second example. So they're a processing facility, and they will contract with, so they source ginger and turmeric and ashwagandha and things like that. They'll contract with farmers in the area, probably not directly with a farmer. So they would contract with a hub of a buyer, or who would then work with 50 different farmers who farm like 1 or 2 hectares. That person, he would be the certified organic, the one with the certification. Maybe he would buy the herbs from those farmers, probably manage the drying would either happen in the fields or with that first level buyer. Then those herbs go to this larger processor, and they would do first. So if it's for a tea company, they would do the first level processing, which would be maybe cut and sift. Some of those machines you probably just talked about, the rose hips. And then those herbs would then be transferred, say, maybe even to Germany. A lot of herbs go through Germany because they have some of the highest quality control and best quality machinery. So it could go there, and then it could go to a brand in the US, and some of those brands then would package the tea themselves, or if it's a capsule, they could encapsulate it themselves. Other brands would then use a contract manufacturer who would do that step. And then the brand is basically doesn't have any manufacturing. They're just doing the storytelling, the marketing, and the selling. And then there's a big range of how much that brand knows about where those herbs are from and can connect to the source. And that is what kind of determines those different examples I asked you if you wanted to know about. Organic helps ensure, even if that larger processing facility I mentioned in South India doesn't know all the farmers, there's a paper trail. So somebody knows. If a company has no idea, like often a brand will just buy from an ingredient supplier, or the contract manufacturer will do the buying, and they will buy on an open market. And that could be like there's auction houses where a bunch of farmers would bring their ashwagandha or turmeric or whatever to this auction house. A buyer would come buy those, however much they want to buy. And so there's no paper trail to the farmers. Or it would be a similar thing with wild harvesters. And so, we're just finishing this buyer's guide to herbal products, which has been quite challenging to do. It's trying to say these are the questions to ask. And I had a lot of people in the industry look at it to give advice, and nobody could really state clearly what to look for. But they said I was naive to think that saying that companies need to know the source of their herbs was possible. And one person told me that only 5% of companies actually can trace the herbs to the source. That could mean that that paper trail exists. I don't really know, but the point is there's a big room for improvement.
Wait, hold on. Did you just say 5% of companies actually know where their herbs are coming from? Did I hear that right?
That's what you told me.
What?
5% of, not 5% of companies, 5% of the, let me check and make sure I have this right. So you'll have to edit this out.
I mean, while you're doing that, that's very interesting. That's a really small number. I mean, it's okay. So there's a couple things you mentioned there that I wanted to clarify. So when you're talking about certification, say you're talking about these farms in South India and things like that, are those certifications internal, like within, those are India's regulations, or is this something that you guys do at Sustainable Herbs Initiative? Like you go in with kind of your standards that they can get themselves up to meeting your standards? Because that's one thing I'm always very curious about. Like for example, for us in our business, we really source all of our herbs very locally. We're a very small business. We're not by any means buying 20,000 pounds of anything. But when I think of the United States, for example, we have certain standards that are set in terms of what it means to be organic, or what it means to be to be following all the CGMPs laid out by the FDA. Of course, the guidelines and criteria and standards in other countries are different, if there are any. I know in some instances there may not be. So I guess I'm curious, is there some way that US-based companies kind of go into those other places and say, hey, we can, if you do your practices in this way, you can have this kind of level of certification, so that other suppliers and manufacturers from these other places have a really, like you're talking about, the paper trail, and they can feel very confident that, they're going to meet certain, microbial specs, or they're going to be, down to, keyed out properly to the right species, and that there's not going to be adulterants and things like that. Thoughts on that?
There's a huge range of quality, and like back to that sparkler example, in that moment, I decided I didn't really care about the whole industry. What I really wanted to do was focus on the companies that were trying to do it right. And so that means companies that are having relationships. And certifications, if a company's Fair for Life certified, they're an EcoCert, which is an international certifying body, would go in and do that audit. SHI, we don't do any kind of auditing or anything like that. And then in India, there's an Indian organic, but then there would be, the companies that are selling their ingredients as these certifications, those are internationally recognized.
I
and
see.
There's a whole process for that. And so that's part of it. But what's also really important is having some relationship, and that can be through a trade show. There's coming up in Europe, there's the biggest organic trade show. And that's where a lot of buyers in the US and Europe meet with primary processing companies, or companies will actually visiting the supply, the source, the community, the companies in the source. And that makes all the difference, because then you have a face, then it's a human to human connection. And problems always come up, but then you can troubleshoot and work with addressing those problems. And at Sustainable Herbs Initiative, what I've really tried to do, because I think relationships and connecting people to people in a way that's respectful, based on listening, is the way to solve these bigger problems. that's really what we focus on, is bringing different people involved, different stakeholders together. And then out of that, like new partnerships, new buying relationships have formed because people know each other, have formed a personal connection. And so it's not just so much of a transaction. I mean, there's a transaction that takes place, but there's also, it's within a context of, oh, I know who you are as a person. And, and it's a small amount. The companies that support Sustainable Herbs Initiative, for the most part, there's some larger ones, but for the most part, they're smaller companies. And all of our hope is that by telling the story of the importance of a relationship, of the importance of knowing where your herbs are from, more people who are buying herbs will ask companies questions like, where are your herbs from? What do you know about the processing? What do you know about how people are treated? That it'll switch on and companies know, oh, people are paying attention. We do need to really follow up on this and get on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if the companies know that their customers, if they know their customers care about that and are going to, in a way, hold them accountable, I guess. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. And companies listen. They all need to, it's a competitive marketplace. They all say, everybody that I talk to, if customers ask, then it matters.
Well, I mean, I guess that makes me think of one thing. You're talking about the customers of herbal products really wanting to, in a way, have trust and faith in the companies that they support, and that the herbs that they're getting are, being done in a good way. How do you tend to encourage people to do that? Like, how do you encourage people to come to understand where the herbs are coming from? Is it just becoming educated on what companies they're purchasing from? Is that kind of the gist of it? Or are there other ways are there certain, I don't know, at the, Sustainable Herbs Initiative, do you have, certain ways that you say, oh, we've kind of gone through these companies, either ones we recommend, or I'm just curious. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the listener that buys herbal products and is like, oh, wow, I've never really thought about this. I wonder if, I'm supporting companies that are doing good work in that way.
Yeah, early on, people would ask me, I wrote a whole blog post why I don't like to recommend companies. But I think that was because, when I learned how to make herbal medicine, what was so empowering was making the herbal medicine. And it wasn't just buying a product on a shelf. And that's a different relationship with the plants and with what I'm taking. And I feel like buying products can be similar. I know everybody's busy. Nobody has time to do research and all of that. And to me, the most meaningful work I have ever done with plants is these journeys, following them to the source and getting to know people along the way. And so I feel like there's a way of doing so say turmeric, or I don't know, some herb that you use a lot in your practice or as a person. Do some research on that one plant, find out where it's from, what are the issues around sourcing, and what the companies are, or if it's a particular company that you're buying from, read up what they say about what they're doing. And if you have questions, ask them. And if you don't necessarily like their answers, don't abandon them if you like them overall, but have a relationship with that company and see, like, how can you encourage them to do more and support them, like by buying products. It's like we're making a donation to support the work that company's trying to do. And these companies are competing, as I said, in a super competitive landscape. And so they need to sell products, and they're competing on the shelf with products that aren't investing nearly what some of the higher quality companies that really care about these issues are investing in, both paying more for raw material, investing in the communities they're sourcing from, paying their own workers better. So those things all cost more. And so thinking of buying a product from companies as a way to support that work, as well as getting the good product for yourself, is one thing. Sort of doing the research on some companies and then believing in them and staying loyal, that like recurring customers is something that companies, those are metrics that matter. And then so when I went to herb school, studied at Rosemary, at that time we were told these are the 3 companies to buy from. And there's still some of the good companies to buy from. But what I do now, rather than say buy from these companies, is look at the companies that support Sustainable Herbs Initiative. There's like 40 companies or 45, and it's growing. There's smaller companies that come in all the time. It's harder to get the bigger companies. But those are companies that are making an investment in not just financially, but a lot of time. We have a lot of ongoing meetings and education and peer-to-peer learning, and there's working groups that are thinking about issues. So they're investing resources in making the industry better. And so that's a place to find where those companies are.
Nice. I love that. So I was, before we got started here with our conversation, I was looking over some of the notes, and you had mentioned something about seeing double and what does it mean to see double? And I was really intrigued by that. I was like, sometimes I joke to myself within my own head, and I was like, like going cross-eyed? I was like, no, she's not talking about being cross-eyed. So I'm really intrigued. What do you mean? What does it mean to see double, and why does it matter?
Yeah. So in Harangna, which is the village where I lived in Nepal, they had a story about the founding of the village years, hundreds of years ago. And they said at that time, the humans and the ancestors lived side by side. And the ancestors, humans could do everything the ancestors do, but the ancestors were just bigger and stronger and more powerful, and they lived much, much longer. And so, but for the most part, they didn't marry or anything like that. But then one young man wanted to marry the daughter of the most powerful ancestor. And so he begged, and finally the daughter was allowed to marry this human. And the human went on a hunting trip with her brothers. So these were all ancestors. And they cried, they tell the story much longer than I'm telling it now. But it was, in this part of Nepal, it's, very mountainous. And the ancestors just would fly over, and the human had to go up and down and up and down. And finally they got to this one point, and the ancestor said, okay, they were looking for a lede, they said. You go to the head of the valley and the top of the valley, and we'll stay down here. And when you see the lede come in, you chase it down here and we'll catch it. And so he went up there, and he was sitting for a while, and nothing came. And the ancestors came up, and there's like, did you find anything? And he said, no, nothing. So they went back down, and he's sitting, and he sees a bird fly by, and he catches a bird and puts it under his hat. And then he doesn't call them. He doesn't say anything. And they come up, did you see the lede? And he's like, no. So this kept going on and on, back and forth. And finally, they were exhausted and exasperated. And they said, you haven't found anything. We chased it up here. And he took his hat off, and he said, all I've seen is this tiny little bird. And they were like, that is the lede. And they were astonished with that he couldn't see that this was what they were hunting. So anyway, they went ahead, they wrapped it in leaf, and they gave him the biggest bone, the thigh bone, because the person who catches it would get the biggest bone. And then they traveled back up and down to the home of his wife. And he walks in, and she's sitting by the cook stove, and the cook fire. He throws the leaf with the bone on her down, and he says, La, this is what we spent the whole day hunting. Your brothers think this will last us for a long time. We're supposed to live on this. And as the bone flew through the air, it got really big, and it fell on her leg, and it broke her leg. And she yelled out, laugh, to her father, why did you marry me to this greedy, meat-eating human? He doesn't see that is what is very tiny can last for a very long time. And so then the storytellers would pause when they tell this story and say that at that moment, the ancestors and the humans separated, because the humans were selfish, because we could only see what with our eyes, physical objects. we couldn't see beneath that, what would make that physical object last a long time or not. We couldn't see the unseen. And so the ancestors are the ones who can see double. And so they talk about another concept called charawa. And charawa is when they would make an offering to, say, the new rice. And they would ask the ancestors to imbue that rice with this essence that came from the ancestors that would make it last a long time. And so it either had that or it didn't. And so to me, would think so much about this seeing double, which to me, so much of herbalism resonated with, right? That our intention matters, how we handle the plants in an herbalist practice way. And then as I was following the herbs through the supply chain, I thought, that's also what I'm doing. I'm seeing double, seeing the people and places and plants that our economic systems don't want us to see. They don't make it easy for us to see. It's another kind of double. And by seeing double in that way, it helps us be less selfish, right? Because it's less just seeing this object and what do I get?
Yeah.
Goes into it.
Yeah, and seeing the humans behind it too, right? Is that that's not just some company like that's not just a farm. It's like, well, those are humans, those are people toiling and working hard, and right? I love that. What a great story. Where did you hear that story?
This was in the village where I lived in Nepal, in northeastern Nepal.
Kidding. Wow, what a great story. I love that. Seeing double. That's great. Because it is so, it's like a good, I feel like it's a good kind of way of, in our modern world where it seems like everything is almost kind of single serving, like single serving, sometimes made very poorly, things break easy, just use it until it breaks and buy another one, it's like we don't really think about like creating something that's going to last for generations. You don't have that, it's all kind of this immediacy and not thinking that long term and not thinking about, future generations even. It's all just kind of a little more myopic, right? So I love that, how that story illustrates that. That's really, really fantastic story.
And I feel like, I think what draws me to this work is, I feel like that's what's at the essence of herbal medicine, right? Any system around the world, it's that sense of care. And so if there's any industry where it's possible to imbue some of that care, so there's more reciprocity, more of some of those qualities of gift exchange than just transaction, it seems like products made from plants should be where we could make it happen. I don't know if it's possible, but...
I would 100% agree with you. It's like, man, if anyone's going to do it, it seems like the herbalist should be able to figure it out, right? Because that's the thing, right? And that's kind of the tricky edge, right? Is we're working with plants, we're working with the living medicinal intelligence of the earth. And that is a sacred thing. That is a thing of beauty. That is a thing that in that one plant that's growing, who out there in the world is going to put that plant into their body and it might heal them. It might transform them. It might change their life. That's a beautiful thing. That's a sacred thing. And yet, in order for that to happen in our modern world, it does kind of have to go through, transactional situations, and it has to be bought and it has to be sold and it has to somehow get to that person. And I know, a lot of people really don't like that, but that is kind of the reality of the world that we live in. But it's like, how can those things be balanced and that people can get into, maybe making an herbal business, but not just have that thought of like, we're going to just come in here and make millions of dollars and rip these people off and just get rich quick or whatever. But like really think about what it is that we're doing here and that we're providing. I know like in the industry, we can't say it, but from my perspective as an herbalist, and I would imagine you would agree, like we're providing a healing medicine that can really help someone. And I think there's a way to balance those two things. I don't know if that makes any sense, but just the way you were explaining that kind of made me think that way.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think that's where especially herbalists and herb schools and can make a big difference not by saying just buy local, just grow your own, but by seeing, because the other part of this trade is, the trade of herbs and spices is one of the oldest trades in the world, with a
very old
of colonialism and extraction. And a lot of the communities in South India or other, all over the world, Eastern Europe, their economies depend on these supply networks. And so I feel like there's a real value in my book, I talk a lot about the work that traditional medicinals has been doing in Rajasthan, the work they're doing to support the communities where they source their senna, say, or it's not a black and white, just buy local, just buy out your back door. It's how can we support right relationship wherever the herbs are from. It's like the distinguishing thing isn't the location, it's how they're cared for and respected, I think. And that's a quality thing, that's a ethics thing.
I love that. Yep. Because just exactly what you're saying. It doesn't necessarily matter if it was grown down the road or across the world, so long as the people understand and care for and are working with the plants in a really good way, and that they're receiving the support that they need to thrive and to flourish, right? Not just to survive, but to thrive. I think that's a good thing. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the way nature functions, right? It's like, yeah, there's a lot of competition in nature, but there's also a lot of harmony and cooperation and partnership that occurs in the natural world too. And I think there's a way that the herbal industry can model that in a way. And I was the other interesting, and I really want to make sure we have time to get into this because I'm very intrigued. There was another statement that you had in the pre-interview where you're talking about the laral. Oh, I said it wrong. The laurel value of a thing, right? What is the laurel value of a thing? And how does it relate to herbal medicine and the herbal products industry? I'm very intrigued by what you have to say about this because I have no idea what it means. And I probably said it wrong and embarrassed myself, but you can correct me on the pronunciation of that one.
Well, I've never heard it spoken, but I think it's laral. But it comes from this Roman word lares, for household gods. And I want to see, it's, and I'll just read this. So comes from the word for the everyday gods who guard the house and hearth. The spirit, this is a quote, the spirits who, if propitiated, watched over the house or community to which they belong. So in other words, if you tend the lares, the house is cared for by the household gods. And if not, that's taken away. But I came across this was from a book by Robert Polk Harrison, a literary philosopher, who's talking about the laral value of a thing is the part of ourselves we put into that object. It's kind of before that, the essence that makes from the ancestors that makes objects last. So it's kind of just a way of saying what I was talking about before. But how I think of it, I think the laral value is what herbalists are talking about when they talk about the importance of intention. And Guido Masse, the herbalist who's from Vermont, also wrote a really insightful essay about my book a while ago when he was talking about the laral value now in the modern world is not just singing to the trees. So singing to the trees is a way, making offerings to the plant. Those are ways of honoring the essence of that plant. There are other ways to honor the laral value. It's getting to know where the herbs are from. It's connecting with that company. It's doing those actions in the modern world to support companies that are trying to do it the right way. I don't know if that's clear what I was.
Yeah, it's totally clear. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I love that. When you were describing that, it reminded. I've been kind of going back and starting to do some. I'm an avid audiobook listener, and I've been listening to. I just finished a 4-book series on all the classic Greek myths, and one of the I believe it was Hestia, there was a lot of talk about Hestia as kind of the deity associated with kind of what you're talking about, the home and the hearth, and the principle of like guest rights in a home was like apparently a really important thing to the Greeks. Anyways, when you were talking about that laral value, it was making me think of Hestia and how there was this great kind of reverence and respect for the nature of the home and the hearth and the way that it is attended to, and that attentiveness, the way you're talking about that same attentiveness to the plants, to realize that there is something of value within the plant beyond its extractive value, beyond its chemical profile, beyond its mercantile value, that there's something deeper within it, as you said, an essence, an intelligence, a consciousness, a spirit within that plant that, we being my wife and I and our work with the plants and with the our very small scale manufacturing business with our spagyrics, that's something that we've always really strived to uphold and maintain in terms of, the herbs that we grow. We make those offerings and talk to them and pray to them and really try to keep that alive, because I think that's an important thing. And I don't know, it seems something worth holding on to, that reverence and that respect for the intelligence of the plant, the beauty of the plant, the knowledge of the plant. I feel like if we get too scientific, too reductionistic, if we don't take that time to slow down and honor that, I feel like something in the medicine gets lost. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but that's the way I feel about it sometimes.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. I mean, because that's sort of the line I walk in the work at SHI is we're trying to, we bring monthly meetings. We begin with a plant visualization and trying to include plants as having a seat at the table in the conversation, as we also hold things like the challenges of certifications for producers, how they bear the cost. Some of the things I was talking about in the Wild Plants Talk, at APA, the equity for wild harvesters, like how to hold both of those, that there is this essence in plants. There's this industry that mostly treats it as commodity.
Yeah.
Is there a point where we can listen and let the plants inform? And so say at these in-person gatherings, a year and a half ago, we were in Southwest Oregon at Herb Farm, and we did a drop dose. We were talking about regenerative farming practices and wild harvesting issues, but we also did a drop dose where Mark from Herb Farm, I can't pronounce his last name, but gave us a tincture we didn't know what it was, and we all took it, and then we went and sat on the land, and then we came back. And this is a group of people who, they're not herbalists. Maybe there were 35 people, maybe 5 are herbalists. The rest are working sustainability or purchasing or sourcing, or, they're not, this isn't something they're familiar with. And then we sat and went around and shared the experience with that plant. And afterwards, Kevin Casey, the CEO of Banyan Botanical, said everybody in that circle was moved by a plant. And yet we went back to business as usual. Like after that, we went, okay, now we'll do this. And I really took that to heart. I was like, okay, if we're really listening to the plants, how do we change what we're doing in a way that still addresses the issues in an industry? If that makes sense. So then when we were in Nicaragua the following fall, we kind of went more deeply into a journey with the plants, with, in that case, ginger, because we were visiting ginger farmers to really listen. And we shared the stories that came to us from ginger. And now those stories are sort of part of the conversations of the circle of SHI members. And they're still operating in the industry, but I'm really trying to see how can we listen? How does it change what we do? How are there other ways to treat are there other ways to do business?
Yeah, I love that. You said something there that really stood out to me that I really, really love, and that was that the plants have a seat at the table. What a great line. I love that because, I mean, you kind of picture it as like, you know, business people and they're trying to do deals and they're talking and it's all about these plants and the plants are like, hello, like, what about me? You know, like, I love that is a delicate bridge to build in a way, right? Of like, how do you bridge these two things together? And I just really tip my hat to you and what you're doing, the work that you're doing at Sustainable Herb Initiative, and for your incredible book too, that you were kind enough to give me a copy of that. Can you share with everybody that's listening where they can learn more about your work and maybe just share about your book a little bit and just talk about where people can find and learn more about what you're up to?
Sure. So my book was published by Chelsea Green Books, and you can find it anywhere where you can get books. Chelsea Green's website. Now I think Penguin represents Chelsea Green, or Bookshop is a good place to support independent bookstores. And then the work of the Sustainable Herbs Initiative is, we have a website, and there is a section that I'm building out that right now it's from the older website, but we're updating it. That's really telling the stories of the botanical supply, the steps that I outlined in a not very thorough way for you here, but really trying to tell those stories in a more detailed way. And there's also a section again, that we're updating, but around take action. And there's for herbalists, for herb teaching, you know, ideas around bringing these practices into teaching, into working with clients, as well as being a consumer of herbs.
Cool. I love that. Well, we'll definitely be sure to post links to your website and to your book in the show notes below. So for everybody that's watching or listening, wherever you might be consuming this content, be sure to click the links below to learn more about Anne's work and to pick up a copy of her. What's the name of the book? You remind everybody what it had a name change. I get confused which one's the current one.
It's Following the Herbal Harvest.
That's right.
The paper is that because it's important. If I can take one more second, the first one was the business of botanicals, which I never liked because it is focused on the business, and one of the key themes is shifting from that idea to the medicine of place. This idea that the medicine and the place can be a huge global supply network, right? In the ways that we've talked, right? That all goes into the quality of that finished product. And so I didn't like the title, Business of Botanicals. And so I got them to change it so that it's more, the book is really about my journey of asking these questions. And my hope is that it invites not to do this or that. It's not really a book about that. It's about questions to ask and digging deeper and having the conversations. Because as I said before, that journey has been the most powerful herbal medicine that I've taken, far more than any tincture or any capsule or any growing that I've done or anything like that. It's the relationships that I formed with the plants and with the people trying to do this work. So it's an invitation to do that in your own way.
I love that. Thank you so much, Anne. This has been fantastic. I love the perspectives that you are able to share with everybody listening. Usually we're talking like clinical herbalism and working with people or medical astrology or alchemy and all this other stuff. And I haven't really done too much in the industry side of things. I mean, mainly because I'm not that well aware of it, to be honest. I think going to APA, the APA gathering, for those of you not familiar, APA is the American Herbal Products Association. And that was really eye-opening for me, too, of being around other people that make herbal products and have their businesses or are suppliers and they're making extracts or they're contract manufacturers, like this whole other world of, it was really eye-opening for me. And of course I got to hear you speak there, and that was where I got inspired. I was like, I think it would be really cool to share some of this knowledge and information with the greater herbal community, because it is really eye-opening. And just like you're saying, I think having an awareness of some of these processes and issues and just the kind of the state of affairs in the herbal world is, I think, good for people to be aware of, especially as it just seems like right now there's such an explosion of herbal products. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it just seems like there's more and more companies, supplement companies and herbal products, and especially with the mushrooms just exploding right now. And it kind of makes me, pause and really think, okay, like where is this going? What direction is this all going? And is it a good direction? And I really appreciate knowing that there's someone like you out there that is doing the work to help ensure that it does move in a good direction. And so thank you for doing that. And thank you for coming onto the plant path to share everything that you've shared with everyone today. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your questions. And there's so much more we could talk about, the idea of growth. Yeah. But another time.
Well, we are always happy to have people back onto the show. So maybe we can do a 2.0 someday. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Anne. Until the next one, take care and be well.
Thank you.